So let's take a closer look at the debate around closing times at Auckland city bars and clubs. I mean, we don't need to reinvent the bloody wheel here. It's New Zealand. Every other country has done this already. Should we be focusing our energies elsewhere, or is the silver bullet between 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and 4 a.m.? Eric Crampton is head of research at the think tank New Zealand Initiative, and he joins me now. Eric, good morning to you.
Good morning.
You've actually looked at this. I'm right, aren't I? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many cities around the world that have had to tackle exactly this issue.
Yeah, from my look at the evidence on this one, there's really not much difference between, well, any 2-hour change in the bar closing times in terms of assaults or other kinds of violence and crime. It's not going to make any difference.
Okay, the police tell us that there is something magical that happens at 2 o'clock, and people who are just drunken louts become violent drunken louts after the bewitching hour of 2 a.m. Is there any evidence to suggest that's true?
Well, it's a bit weird that a lot of the police stats will then spike before 1 a.m. or between 1 and 2 a.m. rather than after 2 a.m. If that were the case, we'd expect the spikes to happen afterwards.
Okay. In Manchester, they did an interesting thing. They introduced 24-hour licensing. Now, if what the police are telling us is true, then that would indicate there was a lot more crime, a lot more violence. What actually happened?
Well, that's one of my favorite studies on this. There's a lot of lots of different studies out there coming to different conclusions, and one of the problems that you'll have is when you change your hours, not all the bars will take that up. What they did in Manchester, they were looking at actual uptake of the longer hours when they switched to 24-hour licensing. What they found there was that once you adjusted for the number of bars that actually take up the longer hours, you saw a shift in when bad stuff happened, but no real change in the total quantity of bad stuff. And that's about what you'd expect.
Okay, so rather than have a peak in bad stuff, the bad stuff happened over a longer period of time, but there was the same amount of bad stuff.
Or just different times. Yeah, so you'd have the same amount of crime, same amount of ambulance sort of traffic, just spread out at different times of the evening.
Okay, what I'm going to do now, I've told you what the police's argument is. This is the council's argument for keeping it open until 4. The council says that if you close the bars at 3, people have effectively, and I'm paraphrasing because it's the council, so it's basically impossible to understand them, they're saying that if you close the bars at 3, all of those drunken, violent people will have an extra hour's worth of energy to be drunken and violent. So you kick them out the bars at 3, and they're actually more energized, they're not quite so comatose, so they'll be more violent. No truth in that either?
Well, if you get everybody out on the street at the same time, then you have bigger problems. One of the bigger factors in getting towards violence after the bars is when you've got a lot of people in the same place kind of trying to fight each other for a taxi, or if there's a hot dog stand open or something, if there's bits of crowding and opportunities for them to bump into each other, that's when you start getting more of the problems. If you have more people who'd be kicked out of the bar at the same time, if you shut at 3 than if you shut at 4, then you've got more opportunities for those kinds of interactions.
So doesn't what you've said so far indicate that 24 hours is the way to go?
I kind of prefer 24 hours. You can make an argument for wanting there to be a bit of a break between sort of daytime activities and nighttime activities, or for having, say, the bottle shops close a little bit before the bars do. But the Manchester evidence suggested that 24-hour licensing wasn't that big a problem.
Okay. So then what we have to do is we have to say, right, we've accepted there is this unacceptable level of violence. Well, there is this level of violence, and most people would say it was unacceptable. I certainly would. So then we say, if it's not opening or closing hours, how do you handle it? How do we nail this down so that Auckland and other cities are not as violent?
Sure. Well, the first thing to remember is that overall crime rates have been decreasing even in Auckland. The last stats that I'd seen on this for 2014 had them well down on the prior 20 years. It's been this continuing downward track. But there's some interesting programs going on in the United States looking directly at alcohol-related crime. So it started in Hawaii and South Dakota, and it's broadened out a bit since then, where offenders who've had alcohol-related offending, they're trying it first on drink driving. if you were out on parole for alcohol-related offending, you'd have a transdermal monitor on, so a little bracelet that can tell whether you've been drinking. If you have been, your parole's over because it sends a signal back to the police station. They found there that not only did they reduce drink driving rates, but they also reduced domestic assault. They weren't trying to affect domestic assault there, they were just trying to cut down on drink driving, but the program targeted at repeat drink drivers knocked back domestic assault rates by 9%. When they extended the program over to Montana, they halved their repeat drink driving rates. It seems pretty effective when you target the people who actually have a bad relationship with alcohol.
Okay, and the police know who these people are because they have caught them before. Who pays for all of this? Is it the alcoholic themselves? Is it the violent person who pays for this technology?
Well, it comes out of police budgets, but you're going to end up saving money because you're not seeing these guys over and over again in the jails.
Yeah, and that's what we want to do. We want to make policing easier and more effective for the police in the first instance. Fascinating. Eric, thank you very much for joining us. Eric Crampton, Head of Research at the New Zealand Initiative. And you know,